Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going back to 2007, and this is going to be one of the nastier cases that we've covered on the channel. I was just learning about a different case, and something came up on YouTube, on the side of the screen about the suggested videos to watch, and it was an interview with Paris Bennett. And in 2007, Paris Bennett murdered his younger sister Ella. The specific video that was first recommended to me was an interview with Piers Morgan, and they had something like Piers Morgan is interviewing a psychopath, and I was like, well, I guess I can't resist that. That's some major clickbait titling right there. So I watched the first one, and that just turned into just a sequence of learning things about Paris Bennett, as well as looking at some of the articles too, not just only the videos. What I have to say about this one is, yes, we introduced by saying that this is particularly nasty, but this is also a very multi-layered issue. Paris Bennett not only murdered his sister in 2007, but there's a very famous 911 call where you can hear him talking to the dispatcher, saying that he accidentally killed somebody, that he thought his sister was a demon, and he stabbed her, not once or twice, but 17 times. He said he stabbed her all over, and by Paris's own admission, the 911 dispatcher asks him to perform CPR on his sister, and he says that he is on the phone, but in reality, he just walked to another room and started counting 1, 2, 3, 4, he's just counting in another room. He's not trying to save his sister's life. He most definitively wanted to have his sister murdered. But it's as nasty as that sounds, that stuff does happen. We've talked about the murders of children on this channel before. But the thing is, Paris Bennett concocted this whole narrative about how he wanted to have his sister murdered so that he could get back in touch with his mother, that he could be the only child in his mother's life. And the thing is with that, it's completely false. It's almost just baloney, to be honest. He didn't want to have his sister murdered so that he could be the only child and he could get his mother back and it would bring him closer to his mother. That is a narrative that he concocted, because many people believe that Paris Bennett is actually one of the more pure examples of a psychopath, someone who is just doing things but is just blank on the inside. When we did our first ever psychopath, sociopath, and narcissist upload, we talked about some of those things where it's like the psychopath is someone who is just born without any conscience, without any sort of inner feelings. They're just blank. A sociopath is the same way, except they aren't born that way. They develop these characteristics at some point in life, usually at a very young age. And then the narcissist is somebody who is quite different. A narcissist is someone who can feel public emotions like shame and guilt and embarrassment, but other than themselves and their own well-being, they don't really care about other people. So that's that's how it was explained to me. But I will tell you, though, from listening to different psychological videos on YouTube, different psychologists have different interpretations of that. That's been the biggest one that we have gone with on this channel, but I'm not a professional psychologist, and I'm glad that I'm not, but that is just one interpretation. You'll hear different things from different professionals in the field about that. But why does everybody say that Paris Bennett is a psychopath, and why don't they believe this narrative that first he's saying that he killed his sister because she thought she was a demon, and then secondarily, he says he did this to have his sister murdered so he could be closer to his mother? What really is going on? Why do people disbelieve him so much? Well, there's a channel on YouTube called Paradise Media, and what they did was they cut up a lot of the Paris Bennett materials and they put them out in small presentations. Some of it's the major documentary, but other parts of it is just like the text and information about Paris Bennett. And what we can say about him is just that the first thing to note is when he stabbed his sister 17 times, he ejaculated in his pants. and there was semen found, like, in his underwear that he had been wearing. And when his mother, Charity Lee, contacted him about it, or confronted him about it, rather, she confronted him, he became hostile. He tried to flip a table over. This is when he's serving in prison. And she also makes the statement that she's like, I know that you've been lying. I've got you figured out. It's all fake. And she said just another personality took over and simply said, took you long enough. And it's like, she seems very well aware that her son does have psychopathic tendencies. And that's kind of where we're at right now. Somebody murdered his sister in 2007. Because he was only 13 years old, he wasn't given life in prison. He was given 40 years, but he'll be eligible for parole in 2027. So that's going to be coming up in just about 7.5 years, and somebody like him might be getting out. A thing to say about Paris Bennett is, recently when we've been talking about true crime cases, we've been wanting to look at how did these things happen. Were there warning signs? Well, Charity Lee, Paris's mother, even admits that he was writing little notes about killing at a very young age. But some people might view that as an enormous warning sign. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. I mean, do you remember being in elementary school? People write stuff like that. And it's not so blatantly like they would say, I want to kill Ella. They don't write something normally like that, but they might make references to video games or movies or something like that, where it'd be like, I want to kill him the way Superman killed Doomsday or something like that. They would say some things like that, or they might even just kind of be referencing guns and such. Kids do say that stuff, and it's not always a major warning sign. Sometimes they're just kind of quoting some media and entertainment that they have, and the average person is aware that that stuff is just fiction and fantasy and stuff, and that it's not real life. The average person is. And the psychopath is too, because as we said, the psychopath is just blank. They know what they're doing is destructive, but they simply don't care. Not to mention, though, they're somewhat apathetic to the world around them, and that they are just, they have the ability to just kind of manipulate the system because they're apathetic. In fact, their whole life is really a manipulation. They're trying to convince people that they are somewhat of a normal person. But when Paris Bennett murdered his sister, he probably lost all chances of kind of like convincing people that he is not a psychopath, especially that he's changed the narrative multiple times, first saying that it was a demon, that he thought his sister was a demon, then saying that he wanted his mother back for himself, and then just his mother kind of exposing the truth out of him. One of the things, though, is, all right, warning sign. He was writing about notes about killing. That is definitely a warning sign if it is partnered with some other pieces of information. Paris Bennett was also someone coming from a long history of mental illness in the family. Charity Lee, his mother, very clearly had this in her own family. Her mother murdered her father. Her mother murdered her own father. Then we're talking about Charity Lee, the mother of Paris Bennett. You want to talk about mental issues in the family? You want to talk about some type of psychopathic rage in the family? And when she had children, I'm just curious why she didn't think that this was more pressing. Why she wouldn't be more aware of the signs of mental awareness and such. Once again, someone's writing notes about killing. On itself, that is not necessarily a destructive issue. Especially if someone's just trying to do that to get laughs and to get attention. People do things like that, and we all have to be aware of that. But when that is partnered with a long history of family mental issues, such as her mother murdered her father, that becomes a major warning sign. Not to mention, this goes way beyond just writing stuff in notes. Paris Bennett was institutionalized. He was institutionalized at a mental facility when he was a kid, and Charity Lee had him pulled out. His mother had him pulled out because she believed that he wasn't being adequately cared for. And is this just a case of denial? Is this just a case of somebody who was kind of like not really able to accept the gravity of the situation that her son had some major psychopathic tendencies? I mean, I can't really imagine the place that he would have been confined in, like the psychiatric institution there. Maybe it wasn't a very good one. I'm not really sure, but just to sort of see that he did not seem to have um, he didn't seem to have any sort of pathway toward a normal life. Not to mention, we do have videos of him striking Ella, not in the most vicious and malicious way, but he definitely is striking her, and like when they're playing in a ball pit and such, and he just starts shaking her, and his mother's like, not so rough. On itself, that action is not such a big deal. If that were just an isolated incident from another kid, that wouldn't be such a big deal. But when you put all of the stuff in context about the family history, being institutionalized and just shaking his sister, he had some tendencies from a very early age to commit this murder. And perhaps though his mother did ignore certain warning signs, and it's like it's a horrendous tragedy. But we said though it's also a multi-layered tragedy because this is really just kind of allowed people to really just have these conversations about what really is a psychopath. And when you're going to hear something about Paris Bennett ejaculating when he murdered his sister, that is very common for psychopaths. It's very common for serial killers. In fact, that's one of the reasons why so many of them do this, is because it's a way that they can achieve sexual gratification. And that's what they said about Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov, that he would just ejaculate during the killings. That's why he did it. Not to mention other people like, we've mentioned Michael Ross on the channel recently, Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. You find these sort of things, and it's all about having sexual desire. And I mean, it's a normal thing among psychopaths and serial killers to have that sort of ejaculatory response when they are committing the murder. But I think that we would see that burst of outrage that we mentioned, flipping a table over when his mother called him out about it. He was exposed. And I don't mean he was embarrassed or vulnerable. He was, did I say vulnerable? I mean, it's not that he's embarrassed. It's that he was exposed and in a vulnerable position. Yes, it's not that he was embarrassed. It's that he was vulnerable. And it's more just like a defense mechanism as opposed to an emotional mechanism. But there was an interesting thing, just to tie this to the end. The first interview I said I saw was with Piers Morgan, and then I watched a clip as well with Piers Morgan talking about this on Good Morning Britain. And what he's saying is that Piers Morgan actually took a psychological test on the show, and they said that he is a sort of a good psychopath, that he is not a complete psychopath, but Piers Morgan has some psychopathic traits. And I believe that 100% because that's how we got into all this. It's sort of talking about the videos from Dr. Ramani Darvusala when she was sort of saying that people who are notorious ladder climbers in life are often exhibiting a lot of psychopathic and sociopathic traits. The people who actually achieve high levels of fame and power are very likely to be psychopaths and sociopaths, because so many times we think about this stuff with murder, but in reality white collar crimes are very commonly committed by psychopaths, because it's like defrauding people and embezzlement and bankrupting people and even just ripping somebody off, or even just stealing somebody's opportunity. The psychopath and the sociopath will do it to enhance their career, and they don't care at all. And I will tell you, the media players like Piers Morgan are just a different type of global elite. It's not only the financiers, it's not only the politicians. Media players are heavily connected into that. It's just a different type of elite circle. And so I wouldn't be surprised for a second if somebody like Piers Morgan had a lot of sociopathic traits. But this is another thing that we can use to kind of conclude on. Just because someone has sociopathic traits, it does not mean that they are the same as Paris Bennett. They're not the same as this psychopath who ejaculates when he murdered his sister purely to manipulate the system. purely because he's almost sort of evil. People can have traits of a mental condition, but not have the mental condition themselves. And this is one of the things that is horribly overlooked when people are kind of having the examinations of just life in general. Someone can have traits of a mental condition, but not have the full mental condition themselves. Even if it's away from psychopaths and sociopaths, traits of narcissism, traits of autism, traits of Asperger's, traits of countless things. Not to mention traits of stuff like depression. I mean, someone can have traits of depression without being diagnosed with clinical depression. It's like these things can exist. So there's a lot to say about how we view our current world. And there's probably an insight into our current world through something like that. But no matter what we have to say is, Paris Bennett is a rather disgusting individual. I mean, I personally would not want to see him out of prison, but it's not really my decision. I would like to see him locked up forever. However, he was sentenced to 40 years, and they said that he will be released immediately when he was 50, but I think, wouldn't it be 54 or something like that? However, he'll be eligible for parole in the year 2027, so he might be getting out much sooner than that. Well, what do you have to say about all this? What do you have to say about psychopaths and sociopaths? And if you're familiar with the case of Paris Bennett, what do you have to say? I would love to hear from you, and until next time.